This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. I'm Carissa Sluss, your assistant editor and host. Episode 412 for April 19th, 2020. Our story for today is 8 to the 8th by Liam Hogan, a Cast of Wonders original. Liam is an award-winning London-based writer. His short story Anna appeared in Best of British Science Fiction 2016, New Con Press, and The Dance of a Thousand Cuts appears in Best of British Fantasy 2018. Other work appears in Analog, No Sleep Podcast, and Daily Science Fiction. This story is narrated by Dr. Sharvi Narain. Sharvi trained as a neuroscientist and now works to promote public engagement with science. Follow her on Twitter at Sharvi Narain, spelled Charlie Hotel Alpha Romeo Victor Yankee November Alpha Romeo Alpha India November. Today's story has a content warning for spiders. And now, we've a tale to tell.
Eight to the Eighth by Liam Hogan. Narrated by Charvi Narayan. Spider was fed up and upside down. She hung from a web in the darkest corner of Witch's cottage, swinging back and forth in the most fed-up manner she could fashion. Each time she swung, she scowled, with all 8 eyes at the torn open envelope with the royal crest on the side table below. Witch's gilt-edged invitation to the palace ball, the social spectacular of the year, had arrived that very morning. Spider knew exactly how things would go. How the annual event always went. Witch would not, of course, RSVP. If pressed, she would say how terribly busy she was, and how she definitely hoped to make it. But she really couldn't say for certain until much closer to the date. But she wouldn't RSVP later on either. Instead, Witch would turn up at the summer palace of the King and Queen of Freyenoyen on the night of the ball, invitation in hand, and claim she'd found herself unexpectedly free of an evening, and she trusted her gracious host wouldn't mind her unannounced attendance. Her gracious host, of course, wouldn't mind at all, because Witch was a witch, and not the sort of person you wanted to get into the bad books of. And all of Witch's books were bad, just in case you were wondering. And some of them were quite full already. And of course, her host knew Witch would be there, and would never RSVP, because that was what she always did. Spider also knew full well how it went, year on year, because Spider was always there as well. Frozen into the shape of a jewel brooch, her legs splayed out in a most unnatural and uncomfortable position to secure Witch's black velvet cloak around her slender throat. And that was far from the very worst of it, because Witch would peer, mock surprised, at the guests in their fabulous ball gowns, and then down at her sombre travelling cloak, and with eyes wide and mouth downcast she would say, as she did everywhere, "But I didn't know there was a dress code." And the King and Queen would smile indulgently and tell her it really didn't matter, but Witch would shake her head and perhaps even stamp her foot a little, which would make her royal host awfully nervous. And then she'd recite the dreaded spell. And Spider would find herself free. But before she could do as much as stretch one of her 8 legs, Spider would feel an awful wrench, like she was being torn apart. And in an instant, there would be 8 8-legged spiders, all identical, all hair. And then again, the same painful splitting, and there would be 64 spiders. And again, and again, and again, 8 times in total, until there were 16,777,216 spiders, all staggering at the blow of having been divided so many times. And before they could recover, Witch would give them their dressmaking orders, and all 16 million plus spiders would be spinning silk like there was no tomorrow, as the musicians fell silent, and the guests and courtiers and servants turned to watch the blizzard of silk and spider legs. And in less than a minute, all the spiders would collapse back into one, which was quite as horrid as being torn asunder, and that one spider a frozen ornament, and Witch would be dressed in the finest and most fashionable of silk garments, and everyone would gasp and cheer and clap at how wickedly clever Witch was. But Spider knew that it was she who had done all the work. She who had been ripped apart and put back together again. Countless times. She who had to stay frozen the rest of the evening, even if there were tasty flies flitting over the pastries and cold meats, returning home hungry and tired and aching, and that, staring down at the accursed in white, was why Spider was so very fed up. Well, Spider muttered, the words in sync with her desultory swing. Not again. Never again. Spider thought long and hard for a way to get out of her onerous duty. Trying to hide wouldn't do much good, because whether she was lurking in the eye socket of one of the 8 skulls of the former door-to-door salesman, or hidden behind the dusty volume of Necromancy for Beginners, the least thumbed of the Witch's library, Witch would always find her. She contemplated, spinning and spinning, until she had no more silk left. But that always left her completely exhausted and utterly miserable. Also, she was keenly aware of the terrible danger of upsetting Witch. Whatever she did, she'd have to make it look like an accident. Spider swung back and forth for the best part of a week, racking her brain, doing the most cursory cobwebbing of the cottage, and it was only on the day of the ball that the pieces of her plan finally fell into place. She wasn't entirely sure it would work, but there was only ever going to be one way to find out. As Witch busied herself with her makeup, searching for the perfect shade to complement the green of her eyes, Spider began counting, over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, blank. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, blank. Whenever she got to where the 8 ought to be, whether counting legs or eyes or skulls, she tried her very best to imagine there was no 8, that the number simply didn't exist. It was an hour, and a moonlit coach ride later, after Witch had arrived at the ball, fashionably late of course, and after she had summoned Spider to build her a dress, that Spider realized, with giddy excitement, that her plan was actually working. As she busily spun the fine silk garments, 1 in 8 spiders sat motionless, not spinning at all. In moments, the dress was ready, and Witch was handing her midnight cloak to a waiting page, and Spider was back to being a brooch around her neck, and applause was echoing through the grand hall. "How very daring," murmured the Queen, eyebrow raised in admiration. Witch looked down in surprise. The design was exactly as she'd specified, but it looked a little more revealing than she'd expected. Diaphanous, even. All over the perfectly fitted dress, there were tiny gaps, hinting at the curves in the flesh below, accentuating rather than hiding. Thank the lucky hags she'd worn her very best lace underwear. And it seemed her dress was a veritable hit with everyone in the ballroom, particularly the gentlemen, and her dance card was quickly filled even without any messing about with love potions and the fruit punch. She smiled indulgently, congratulating herself on yet another spectacular spell. Silently, immobile, Spider seethed. Her little rebellion had utterly backfired. But as the candles in the magnificent chandeliers burnt down, as the evening wore on, and after so many dances with so many men, some clumsier than others, stray threads began to appear all over Witch's dress. She looked down, annoyed. Shoddy workmanship. She considered briefly having Spider do some running repairs. But at just that moment, the Baron stepped forward. The tips of his magnificent moustache waxed to needle points that reminded Witch of the cursed spindle on a spinning wheel, and quite set her dark heart aflutter, and she let herself be whizzed around the ballroom in an energetic waltz. It was the 2 left feet of the Prince of Baton Vai that stepped on the first loose silk thread. The Duchess of Conti, a moment after, trapped the second, the 2 pulling in opposite directions. A few bars later, and well before any of the dancers realized what they had inadvertently done, threads were stuck to legs and arms and underfeet and wrapped around ceremonial swords or between the sections of elegant fans. The waltz crescendoed to a dramatic halt, Witch, feeling dizzy and breathless and suddenly rather chilly. The Baron blushed a deep crimson. His moustache quivered in the silence that followed, his eyes darting down again and again before being hauled reluctantly up like some naughty child. And then he was clapping and bravoing with all his might as Witch stood in the dead centre of the majestic ballroom. The rest of the guests were soon cheering and clapping along. Only one made the mistake of whistling. His piercing note was cut abruptly short with a snap of Witch's fingers almost before it had begun. Fortunately for him, a quick-thinking page rushed forward with a pitcher of water. The spell would probably wear off by the next day, although the effect on the cad's moral character of spending the rest of the night in the palace moat as a trout would likely last a lifetime, with the applause refusing to die out. Witch made her stately way to the cloakroom, head held high. Own the moment, she hissed to herself. My cloak, she demanded imperiously, and then repeated with the addition of a deadly glare as the attendant gaped and stuttered. She swiftly pulled the warm velvet over her goose-bumped flesh. She summoned her carriage and sat rather unsteadily in it, thumbing through the stack of calling cards that had been thrust into her hands as she was making her exit. A very thick stack of calling cards. Always leave them wanting more, her mother, the crone, often said. Witch sorted through the cards, dropping most of them to the carriage floor. She unfroze Spider, who, on second thoughts, decided that being frozen might actually be for the best, and so didn't dare move. The dagger of a crimson-painted fingernail approached. But instead of jabbing, Witch's finger curled and began to softly stroke Spider's trembling body. You know, Spider, Witch mused aloud, I think I might have to retire that particular party trick. Now, nobody will pay any attention to the dress you spin, no matter how gorgeous it is. They'll just be waiting for it to unravel, and will be most disappointed if it doesn't. Fortunately, half a dozen of these cards are from the finest tailors and dressmakers of the kingdom, willing to give me their very best garments for free, in the hopes I'll wear them to the next ball. I don't suppose you'd mind, Spider, if... Spider was giddy with relief, tapping out her ready assent. And I guess that means I won't need you as a brooch either. Spider thought about that. Thought once again about all those annoying but incredibly tasty insects the bright lights and tables of finger food attracted. She began sketching out a design on Witch's naked shoulder. A clutch bag with room for a small passenger? Well, why not? Spider purred as she settled down to sleep on the journey home, dreaming of moths and flies, and maybe even a small roach or two. Idly, Witch turned over the card from the Baron, a little thrill sending shivers down her spine every time she reread the words scribed on the back. Such a charming rogue. All in all, it had been a most enchanted evening.
In this story, there's a sense of tension and dread that hooks into us and tugs us through the narrative. And just when we're sure a wardrobe malfunction spells inevitable disaster, there instead is redemption in the form of the greatest success of the spider's so-called career and the witch's so-called social life. The conflict is resolved, but not in the way that was expected. How cleverly this story is constructed by laying out the witch behaving in such a predictable manner year after year. And that predictability should be her undoing. Instead, it's the catalyst for an unpredictable evolution, a new way of living for the spider and the witch that benefits them both. It's hard not to consider this story without framing it in a pandemic perspective. It's what's at the top of all of our hearts and minds these days. And even in these dark times, I'm not opposed to stories with hard or dark elements. And with spiders and witches, that's perhaps the direction I expected this story to take. A cruel witch and a spider battling to save her own life. Instead, we get two beings surprised to discover a new synergy between them. Instead of going dark, The story banked on an unexpected compromise and cooperation, and it totally worked. In these uncertain times, it's compromise and cooperation that will ultimately get us through. And maybe, if we're all as flexible and evolutionary as the witch and the spider, we'll find the benefits in this new way of living. The story is a hopeful one, and hope is precious in times like these. Join us again next week for 2 flash fiction stories in our Little Wonders episode, Hearts in Boxes. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. We'd love to be able to offer our narrators more than token payments, and our hardworking associate editors anything at all. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on our Patreon Discord server, the EA Forum, forum.escapeartist.net, or visit us on Twitter at Cast of Wonders. Come say hello. Cast of Wonders is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip and assistant editors Andrew K. Ho and Carissa Sluss. Associate editors Amy Brennan, Alicia Caparasso, William Haight Minor, Umaira Hussein, Sean Proctor, Ray O, Susie Rodriguez, and Emma Smales. Audio producer Jeremy Carter. Our art director is Alexis Goebel, and our community manager is Danny Daly. Our episodes are released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music, Appeal to Heavens, is by Alexei Knob and available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening.